Hello, and welcome to Critical Wave Theory. Sometimes I like to look at failed TV shows, the pilot episodes that never quite launched the TV series. So, when people talk about LA Confidential, they almost always mean Curtis Hanson's 1997 film, which some people consider as a masterpiece. It's one of those rare crime films that seems almost untouchable, at least if you ask some people. It's a movie that won Oscars, launched careers, and somehow managed to condense James Ellroy's massive, labyrinthine novel into a gripping 2 hour experience. I have to admit, I've never actually seen LA Confidential, the movie, and you might wonder why. Why didn't I watch that when I was, going to watch this? Well, I guess I just didn't want my perception tainted. I wanted to see if this could stand on its own. And you know what? It's actually not that bad of a pilot, even if it didn't launch the series. Uh, this is another chapter in the story that is far less well known and certainly not forgotten by devoted fans. But at the same time, you can only find this pilot episode if you look on YouTube or something like that. It's not exactly something that you can find in mainstream streaming services or whatever because it's a canceled pilot. So in 2003, HBO attempted something incredibly ambitious, turning LA Confidential into some sort of ongoing TV series. A pilot was produced, expectations were high, and then it basically disappeared into television history. So, yes, I'm looking at the fascinating story of the LA Confidential pilot that almost changed crime television, or it at least had a chance to do something like that. And, it just didn't quite make it. So, after the enormous success of the 1997 film, adapting Elroy's novel into a series probably seemed like a perfectly logical next step. The movie had proven audiences were willing to embrace some morally gray characters, some sprawling conspiracies, and richly realized visions of 1950s Los Angeles. And the television format offered something the film simply couldn't. Instead of compressing hundreds of pages into a single feature, HBO could let the story breathe a little bit more. Elroy's novel is filled with intersecting investigations, political corruption, organized crime, Hollywood scandals, and some deeply flawed police officers. A serialized adaptation promised the opportunity to explore every corner of that world, and you could get into maybe a little bit more depth of the characters and the situations. So, what's not to love about that possibility? So, years before prestige television became the norm, HBO was already experimenting with that idea of making a series like this. The production assembled an impressive cast. Kiefer Sutherland stepped into the role of Detective Jack Vincennes, and Josh Hopkins portrayed the intimidating Bud White, I believe, if I remember the characters correctly. David Conrad played the ambitious Ed Exley. Melissa George starred as Lynn Bracken, and Eric Roberts took on the role of Pierce Patchett. And it's a talented lineup, but they faced some apparently impossible challenge with this pilot. The performances from the 97 film became iconic, and audiences couldn't help but make comparisons. In the original film, you had Kevin Spacey, Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce, Kim Basinger, and James Cromwell. And even if you've never seen the movie, like I haven't, some of those are some pretty big names. And those portrayals, for a lot of people, I'm sure they had become inseparable from the characters. So it's a little like trying to reboot a beloved classic while everyone is still quoting the original, and every creative decision risked inviting another comparison. And sometimes actors become synonymous with characters. One of the best examples of that I can think of is Robert England as Freddy Krueger. A lot of people, they will not give a reboot of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise a chance because they can't imagine anybody else stepping into that role. And that could very well be the case for, this series. And one of the most interesting things about the pilot is that it wasn't trying to continue the movie, at least not from what I understand, because HBO started it from the beginning. So it wasn't a sequel, it wasn't a remake of the film, at least not exactly. It was like a fresh adaptation of Elroy's novel or something like that. I'm sure they would have changed some things around here and there, like they always do, but the point is, it wasn't just going to be a perfect remake of the film or something like that. And that meant the pacing would be very different too. Character relationships might unfold gradually instead of racing towards some major revelations. And that probably made this pilot not be as exciting as it could have been, because they were sort of letting the characters breathe a little bit. And the political structure of the LAPD might have been able to receive much greater attention. Supporting characters had some room to develop. And most importantly, entire storylines omitted from the movie could finally have been explored. But of course, they weren't. It's an approach that modern audiences would immediately recognize because it's actually pretty common. Shows like this exist now, and they demonstrate that their stories, that these noir like stories can thrive over multiple episodes rather than a single film. But it's like they didn't want to give this one a chance, HBO and maybe viewers, because apparently it wasn't a runaway freight train of success. Stylistically, the pilot embraced many things that people apparently love about classic noir: the 1950s Los Angeles, police corruption, Hollywood glamour hiding criminal underworlds, morally compromised heroes, a lot of juicy type of content, sharp dialogue, complex conspiracies, probably room for romance or sleaziness. It's the sort of world where just the facts, ma'am, is never enough because everyone is hiding something. And the difference here was probably rhythmic, because they were stretching the story out a little bit more. Rather than delivering constant dramatic payoffs, the pilot would be carefully laying the foundation for an expanded series. And who knows, if this had been successful, there could have been spin offs. You could have individual characters getting their own shows, that sort of thing.